As we continue through this great season of Easter, it's not just one day, it's a whole season that goes about 7 Sundays. We find more examples of the early church booming and sharing the gospel in all different kinds of ways, but lots of interesting things happening. I want to read a few verses before the passage we have listed today to give a little bit of background as we come into this passage. I'm going to begin with verse 36 of chapter 15 in the book of Acts. After some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Come, let us return and visit the believers in every city where we proclaimed the word of God and see how they are doing." He says this because they're entering on to his second missionary journey. So we're going to go back and check on all the churches they helped start and see how they're doing. Barnabas wanted to take with them John, who was called Mark, but Paul decided not to take with them one who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not accompanied them in the work. Well, the disagreement became so sharp that Paul and Barnabas parted company. In other words, they had a big fight right out there on the road. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and set out the believers, commending him to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. Now we begin with verse 1 of chapter 16. Paul went on also to Derbe and Lystra, where there was a disciple named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. Timothy was well spoken of by the believers. In other words, he had a really good reputation everywhere, in Lystra and in Iconium. Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and had him circumcised because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. As they went from town to town, they delivered to them the observance, the decisions that had been reached by the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem, which is the home church. So the churches in Derbe, Lystra, and other places were strengthened in faith and increased in numbers daily. They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And here, Asia just refers to what we would call Turkey today, parts of Turkey. Then they had come opposite Mysia, and they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to go there either. So, passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. And during the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia, pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when he had seen the vision, we immediately, notice, we moved from third person to first person plural. Did you catch that? We immediately. This means that Luke, the author of both the book of Luke and Acts, is present there, and he's telling us, I'm there too. Let me read it again. It's all third person up to this point. When he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis. I mentioned the we here because Luke he's a first-hand witness of all these things that are happening, and then he goes and writes it in the book of Acts. And from there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days, and on the Sabbath we went outside the gate by the river where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth, which meant she was a very wealthy woman, a woman of distinction in her community. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul, and when she and her whole household were baptized, she urged us, again Luke speaking, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, will come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Surprises on the mission field, that's the subject before the house today. Surprises on the mission field. Paul had plenty of them as he started churches all over the Mediterranean. And one of the biggest surprises has to do with all the conflict he ran into here and there and everywhere. I just read an example of it right before the passage for today, where Paul and Barnabas are having this fight over whether Mark's going to join them, and they just disagree so strongly that they separate. They part company. It's just too much for them. I was thinking about a different way of describing this, when you have conflict in the church. I want to call it theological road rage. How about that? Yeah, that's a pretty good term. I don't think I've ever heard that. I think I'm going to coin that term, theological road rage. Road rage is a problem in our country right now. People get all upset about the slightest traffic snarl or the traffic too slow, and we're all racing here and there. It happens to all of us. Yeah. I remember one Saturday morning, we were having a program down at the church there in Dallas, and I was racing down Central Expressway to get there. I just wanted to make sure I got there on time. And I saw there was the lane over to the right was moving faster, so I just jerked my car right over into that lane. And I didn't realize, I guess I sort of pulled in front of this pickup. And he was not happy about that at all. In fact, he pulled around beside me, put his window down, ready to yell at me. I put my window down, ready to yell at him. It was a church member. He said, "Oh, it's the preacher." I said, "Oh, it's a parishioner." Then we sort of raced on down to the church. But we were very good friends, and we still are. I keep up with him every once in a while. He's moved into a retirement home. We're still good friends. We had that one altercation, that one disagreement, and yet there was so much on which we agreed. So we didn't just stop talking to each other because we had that one altercation. There are conflicts in the church and on the mission field, and Paul dealt with them everywhere. He dealt with them even as he came to Derbe and Lystra. But he also got a big surprise there. It was kind of a happy surprise. He had traveled there on his first missionary journey and started churches. He comes back and he sees the church is growing. There's a lot of good stuff going on. It reminds me of Randy Taylor, the former president of San Francisco Theological Seminary, who was born in China because his father, Carr Taylor, was a missionary in China. And back in the 1930s, when Randy's mother passed away, they came back to the United States. And after that, Chiang Kai-shek was taken over and lost out to the communists, and all the churches that they had planted had to go underground. In 1983, Randy Taylor was elected the moderator of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA and decided he would travel back to China and see if he could find those little churches that his father had started when he was a boy. And he was stunned to see how they were booming and growing, and they were so excited to see him again. I saw it in 2006 when I traveled to China to visit the churches and preach and lecture and all that. And there are millions of Christians in China now. Church is booming there. Paul goes back to Derbe and Lystra and is stunned at how there is growth, and there's even more growth in response to his second visit. But he meets this young man such an interesting young fella named Timothy. Had a great reputation. If anybody had ever done reference calls on him, everyone would have spoken highly of him. He was a good person. His name in Greek, Timothy, means the one who honors God. Timao means I honor, and the T-H-Y, anytime you see T-H-Y in any name, it's about theos, or theology, or about God. It's the word for God. So, for example, the name Dorothy is a combination of Dora, which means gift, and T-H-Y, which is God. So anybody named Dorothy is gift of God. I remember telling someone I met here early on when she said she was kind of down. I said, "What's your name?" Dorothy. I said, "Oh, your name means gift of God." "Oh, I'm going to go tell my husband right now." Theodore is the male version of that. Theo and Dora, gift of God. Timothy's name means the one who honors God. And really, Timothy should be kind of a microcosm of the whole church. Timothy should represent all of us as brothers and sisters in Christ. We are all called to honor God in everything we say and everything we do. And apparently he did, and Paul saw that immediately. I want you as one of my people. We're going to spread the gospel. There was a challenge with Timothy, though, because he was the product of a mixed marriage. His mother, named Eunice, that we find out about in 2 Timothy, and his grandmother, Lois, is named there also. Eunice was Jewish, and his father was Greek. And this was a problem for the Jews in the area. They considered him a heathen. And that's why we enter into the whole circumcision thing. Now, it's important to understand that Paul divided issues between core issues and marginal or peripheral issues. A core issue for Paul would be Jesus is Lord. And those were fighting words in Rome because all the Romans said Caesar is Lord, and when the Christians, this little band of Christians came along and said Jesus is Lord, whoa, that caused all kinds of problems. And so why so many went to the Colosseum to be killed. Jesus as Lord is the main core issue of the Christian faith. It's the oldest statement of faith. So Paul wasn't going to go anywhere unless they said Jesus is not Lord. That was a core issue. Marginal issues were issues like circumcision or whether women should be in leadership in the church. And what Paul did was adjust to the different situations in which he found himself. In this situation, circumcision was important, and so kind of lift it up there. We can put it down. Here, women need to keep silent. Over here, we want to lift them up as leaders. So we had all different kinds of ways that Paul was dealing with these issues. Now, what's the deal here? Is Paul talking out of both sides of his mouth? Well, sort of. But it's much deeper than that. The truth is, real leaders understand how to deal with different people in different situations in different ways. Think for a moment about the wonderful book by Ken Blanchard called Leadership and the 1-Minute Manager, where he says a supervisor should never treat everybody with the same cookie-cutter approach as a supervisor. This person needs to have a little tighter rein on that part of her job, but a little more space over here, and that one you can just delegate authority to because that one already gets what to do, and that one you got to keep a real tight rein on. You don't use the same pattern with every employee. Paul was like that in the way he dealt with some of these issues. He met this woman named Lydia, who was obviously a very wealthy woman, and a woman of significance in her time and her place. And she was from outside of Philippi. And if you remember, Paul's favorite church was the Philippian church, and the letter to the Philippians is a love letter to the people he loved. And there is not a single mention in that letter of women needing to stay silent. In fact, if you read it carefully, you will see him greeting women who were leaders in that church, Euodia and Syntyche. And he actually is asking them to agree because they're disagreeing on something. But he calls them as fellow workers. He describes them. These were fellow workers with me and with Clement. And so, Paul understands that women need to be in leadership positions, but he deals with it in different places in different ways. And the same is true with the circumcision issue. Like Paul Tillich, the theologian, the Apostle Paul accommodated to culture depending on where he was. So here he comes into Derbe and Lystra. It's a big deal that Timothy has a Jewish mother. So he says, okay, we're going to have Timothy circumcised. And you just sort of picture Timothy sitting on the front row. I'm sure he was thinking, gee, Paul, could we renegotiate this one? I mean, I don't know if I signed up for this part. Here's Paul bringing surprises on the mission field because he's dealing with all different kinds of cultures and contexts. It's important to understand that. There's another surprise that comes in this text, and that is, it's surprising to me anyway, that the Spirit says, no, you're not going to go in there, parts of Asia. No, you're not going to go there. No, over here, Macedonia gets a little vision. That's where you need to go. Now, what's the point of that? The point of that is that in the providence of God, sometimes God shuts certain doors and then opens another one. And sometimes it has to do with timing. For example, in the late 1980s, I came here, was invited to give stewardship talk or something up there in what was the Great Hall before the fire. Looks just like it. They rebuilt it just like it. I think I had to follow a Mark Twain impersonator or something. I don't remember. But I was impressed with the people that I met. And then a few years later, after Scott McClure left, I got a call to maybe think about coming to be the pastor. And I prayed about it. And the Spirit was saying, no, not through with you there in Texas. And then in 2005, again, a call came. And I even came and interviewed, came and met. And the Spirit kept saying, no. Not this Birmingham thing. You're supposed to go to the seminary in Pittsburgh. I thought, I wonder if this door will ever open. I guess not. And then to my great surprise 4 years ago, the door opened again. But this time the Spirit said, yes, this is what you're supposed to do. So you see, in your life, you may think, oh, God is shutting that door, shutting me off from this thing I thought I was supposed to do. But just know that there's always another door opening. I mean, if you want to make God laugh, just tell God your plans. That's the wonderful old line that I think still works. And God will surprise you. You know why? Because God is in charge. We think we're in charge. We got this and that going on in the church. Whoa, my gosh. God's in charge. And God is going to provide. God's going to get us through whatever is going on. That's what God did with Lydia, providing all these resources, a room and board for Paul and his workers, his fellow gospel spreaders, so he didn't have to go do tent making. He could just go preach the gospel. We see example after example of God providing. Think about our own children's fresh air farm and how that came out of a great new gift, a big gift years ago, decades ago. Think of the thousands of children, not only disadvantaged children, but some of our own children who have been helped by the Children's Fresh Air Farm. Think about the mission works we have done in Mwandi and Chiapas and Rwanda and other places around the world. It's always God providing. I think about the Moscow Presbyterian Theological Seminary where I lectured years ago, and it was started by a little Korean businessman and a Presbyterian elder named Elder Lee. And he said, God, I'll make a deal with you. If you help me be successful on my business, I'll bring 10,000 people to Christ. Now, no American ever talks this way. Only Koreans talk this way. And he looked around, and he was very successful in his business. And in the early 90s, he said, I can't convert anybody else. They're all Presbyterian here in Korea. I'm going to Russia. And he came to Moscow, and he bought a factory and turned it into a seminary, brought theologians. We're there now from the United States lecturing, preaching. And guess what the Presbyterians were there? They're Pentecostal. I have a hard time putting those two words together, Pentecostal, Presbyterian. Their hands were in the air when we prayed and when we sang, and we from America could only get about this high, you know. I was stunned at how the church was beginning to grow coming out of persecution in Russia. We see example after example of God bringing surprises on the mission field, God doing something that we don't expect. I think about the missionaries. I used to know Bill and Virginia Pruitt, who did mission work in the Belgian Congo years and years ago, and how in one service, Bill thought, I need to get their attention in this little village, and so he did a couple of magic tricks to kind of get their attention. Well, the second one he did scared them so much, half of them ran out of the church. And he said to his host, maybe I shouldn't do that trick anymore. And the host said, well, just don't do it until after the sermon, you know. And so this witch doctor got mad, the medicine man, because he saw the missionaries having power and the God they were referring to having power over the people. So he put a curse on the school. And that scared most of the people, and they were getting ready to leave. And Bill said, wait a minute, bring the witch doctor in here, and we'll have a magic duel. And he challenged the witch doctor to a magic duel. And he did a magic trick. And the witch doctor couldn't do it and lost all his power and authority with the people. And instead of just embarrassing the medicine man, he said, I'll teach you this trick and many others if you will become a Christian. And the man agreed, and he changed his heart, and it transformed that whole village. In fact, that witch doctor's son became a minister, spreading the gospel everywhere he went. Surprises on the mission field. We see them. We encounter them. They happen all the time. Where God changes our lives and sometimes changes our minds and lifts us up to a totally new place. To this God be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.